So the agenda for this week is we're starting our last unit of the semester. It's on the graphic novel Daytripper. And sort of the last assignments that we have over this kind of, I guess, 3-week period. So last day of class is May 17th. We will have our final paper on the graphic novel Daytripper. We will have a common final exam, and we will have the last writing quizzes and discussion boards. So there's not that much stuff left to complete. You can definitely see the light at the end of the tunnel. And so if we can just all sort of stay strong, I think we'll be able to have a successful completion of the semester, which I know has been hard on everyone. This whole year has been tough on everybody. So if we could finish strong and end it on a good note. So if you look on our weekly calendar, we see that we're in Unit 4, and this will be our last unit of the semester. So we're going to briefly talk about this unit first before we look at sort of the things that you're doing for this week. We'll do a bit of an overview. So this is the unit in which we are working on the only book you have to purchase. All right, which is the graphic novel Daytripper. If you have a physical copy already, that's great. If you bought it at the beginning of the year, it was listed in the Hostos bookstore. Some of you even asked about it at the beginning of the year. If you've purchased it, now's the time to pull it out and start reading it. If you did not purchase it, please, please, please take the suggestion to purchase a digital copy. All right, it's the exact same book if you get a digital copy, except you get it right away. You don't have to wait until it's delivered. All right, and you don't risk falling behind. So here in the week 14 folders, and I'll send an announcement about this, are 2 links to buy the digital version. So if we click the Amazon link, for instance, all right, the link on the website takes us to the Amazon page. All right, if we look at the 2 options to purchase the book, all right, here it is, Daytripper. Here's the book. All right, we have a paperback book that does deliver in terms of Prime, but if you also look here, the Kindle/Comixology version. All right, this is the digital copy. So also you can see that the digital copy is also a little bit cheaper, which is, students like that. Everybody sort of likes that. And you'll be able to read it. If you don't have a Kindle app on your phone or tablet, that is completely free, so you don't need to pay for a separate app to read it. You just would have to buy the actual digital copy. And the digital copy is exactly the same as the physical copy. All right, it's exactly the same. So if you don't have it, please go ahead and purchase the digital copy. You will need this book, Daytripper by Gabriel Ba and Fabio Moon, to complete Unit 4 of the class, to do one of our last sections, our last major assignments. So if you have not purchased it, please purchase it as soon as possible. Let's return back to week 14. All right, so that's the big thing that you want to do to complete our last unit, is just make sure that you have purchased the book. All right. For this week, what we're doing is we're reading the first little bit of Daytripper and doing writing quizzes 7, 8, and discussion board number 8. Before we jump into this, if you have not yet submitted the research project, please do so. submitting it late, remember, is totally acceptable. I'm not going to take points off if you submit it today or tomorrow, but you need to do it soon. Remember that in addition to the last assignments listed on the syllabus, you do get the opportunity to rewrite one paper for a better grade. So you could choose to rewrite versions of the research project for a better grade if you so choose, but you have to have it turned in to do so. Right? So if you're trying to complete week 13, that's really important. To start on week 14, basically it's like kind of we're back to one of our more normal weeks where we will read something, we'll have the context for it, and then you'll do the smaller assignments of the discussion boards and the writing quizzes. So if we go into the week 14 folder, one of the things that you will see is I have dedicated videos and PowerPoints for every chapter of this book. So every chapter that you read, there will be a PowerPoint that goes over that and discusses some of the key themes, discusses some of the key moments in the book. So for this week, you need to read chapters 1 through 4. All right, and reading chapters 1 through 4, each video has, each chapter has a PowerPoint and video that will walk you through the themes, it will introduce what's going on, it will discuss with you what's going on, so that next week we will then discuss chapters 1 through 4, and then you can do the rest. So every chapter of the book will have its own video and PowerPoint to help walk you through it, including the one that we're going to do today, which is basically just introducing comics, a little bit of the book, and how to read them. So these are the videos and PowerPoints for chapters 1 through 4. Once you have watched the videos and read chapters 1 through 4, then you'll be able to do writing quiz 7, writing quiz 8, and discussion board number 8. They cover the materials of chapters 1 through 4. So it's just the stuff that we're doing this week. One thing to keep in mind, before you do writing quizzes 7 and 8, make sure that you have read at least the first 2 chapters of the book. And then once you've read all 4 chapters, you'll be able to do discussion board number 8. All right, so just make sure that you have got the reading done before jumping in and trying to do the writing quizzes. Right. So, so that's what we need to complete for this week of the semester. By Saturday, I hope to have everything graded and returned to you. Any outstanding assignments, and of course, any of the research project. That's it. Does anybody have any questions about what you need to do for week 14 in the semester? So one of the things to keep in mind is that the book that we're reading, which we'll introduce a bit in this PowerPoint, this class session, is a graphic novel. Now, graphic novels are basically a fancy way to talk about comic books. All right, so if you have started to read this book, or if you're just beginning to read it, or you purchased it, you will notice that it is essentially like a big, long narrative, but written and drawn like a comic book. So one of the things that has occurred with graphic narratives over the last, 30 years, 25 years, is a growing complexity over what can and should be written in a comic book. So the example that I posted here are all superhero stuff. This comic is not a superhero book. It has nothing to do with superheroes, has nothing to do at all with what you might think of when somebody says comic books. You might think Iron Man, Spider-Man, all of that. This is completely different. This is a story that you would see in any other type of medium, a movie, a novel, a traditional novel, anything like that. It just now has art to go along with it. All right. So we're going to take a look at some of the first few pages of the graphic novel. All right. Look at some of the first few stuff from Daytripper. All right. So this is from the first chapter. There'll be some spoilers, but not really. So let's take a look at how Moon and Ba, our authors and artists, are going to start presenting this story. All right, so that's the first 3 pages of the book. Once you get it, you'll be able to read it. All right. So let me just kind of give you a brief summary before we start breaking down the terminology and how you actually go about reading and understanding what you're looking at when you look at the first few pages of the book. All right. One, this will be our main character. His name is Bras, B-R-A-S. Right. You will see that there's a combination of sort of dialogue boxes, as well as you'll see characters speaking. And this is really important. This really confuses students, right? Up here, you might not be able to see it so easily on your screen, but if you look at the PowerPoint and if you look at the book when you purchase it, up here in the right-hand corner, next to this picture of his eyes framed by the light here, it says Chapter 1, 32. All right, Chapter 1, colon 32. So whenever you see this, this book has 10 chapters. The big number underneath it is the character's age when the chapter occurs. Okay, so this here is telling you it's chapter 1 of the story, and this big number 32 is telling you that Bras, as our main character, is 32 years old. Right, so when you have to read chapters 1 through 4, all right, what you're going to look for is this stuff right here. And they get a little artistic with it. So it won't be in the same place at the same time. Sometimes it'll be very big in the first panel. Sometimes it might occur on the second page of a chapter. All right. But you can find, this is how you tell if you've read through the right amount. Because remember, we're reading through chapters 1 through 4 this week. So let's now break down this looking at some basic comics terminology. All right, there are 5 key things to remember, 5 key techniques that go into crafting graphic novels. All right, constructing graphic stories. They're the panel, the frame, word balloons, captions, and splash pages. So these are the 5 key terms you're going to need to remember as you analyze the reading material for this unit. Just like how last unit we focused, a lot of the stuff focused on camera movement or sound. A panel. A panel is basically a square that you see in a comic book or on a page of comics. So one square is a panel. So if we look at our examples here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 panels. Right? Anything that is squared off like that, no matter the size, if it's big, small, square, rectangle, circle, all right, it's framed off like that, it's called a panel. So you can think of the panels as the big sections of the comic that you read. So we have this big one here for the newspaper, third one, and fourth one. Right? So the panel is the square, the boxes, whatever is framed for you as one part of the sequence of art as it progresses, telling you the story. Next, we have the frame. The frame refers to the outside of a panel, just like a frame when you put up a picture, and just like how a panel can be any shape, so too does the frame. So you could have a circle that's framed, you could have a square that's framed, a rectangle, just like when you go down that aisle at Target or whatever to buy a picture frame, you see all different shapes or sizes. So the panel is the entire square. The frame is just the edge. All right, it's just this edge right here. Right? It's also important to note that frames can be broken. All right, so this little comic here from an old newspaper, when the child sneezes, they sneeze so loud that it's broken the frame. So sometimes you will see the frame broken for effect, to show action or energy. So panel, frame. Next one is the caption. So this can get where it starts to get a little tricky for students. All right. One thing to note about captions. Captions will always be in squares. So when you see words within a panel and they're framed by a square, that's a caption. The easiest way to understand a caption is that is the voice of the narrator. Okay? So just like when you read a story, all right, you will have a narrator that tells you a book as you read a book. It may not be the voice of a character, it may not be the character's mind. It's like, the person the way the author tells you the story, even if it's not a character, right? Think of the captions as the narrator. So in this comic, as you read chapters 1 through 4, if you're reading words that are within a square, that is not any character's individual words or thoughts. That is the narrator telling you information about the characters. All right. So this narrator is a type of narrator that we call omniscient, which means that it can see into the mind of their characters. But this is not a character. So when you see words within the square, like this, think of it as the voice of the narrator. Who is the narrator of this book? We don't know. It's not a character. It doesn't show up anywhere. Just like a lot of books will have a narrator that isn't a character. It's just an omniscient voice. Right? So when you see a square, right, that is the voice of the narrator, not a character. You will know the voice and thoughts of characters because they always come in word balloons or thought balloons, right? And there are 3 main types of word balloons. You have the normal one here, which refers to speech. You have the ones with the 3 little bubbles here, kind of looks like a cartoon of a smoke signal, but the 3 little bubbles, that is the character thinking. And then finally, when they're yelling or screaming, you'll see, it in kind of a broken form. So if you don't see words in this comic in any of these, then it's the voice of the narrator. Right? You will see what everybody's thinking by using word balloons. So, for example, in this scene from chapter 1 of the book, these white parts here, those are characters speaking. That's the characters talking to each other. Whereas the square caption here is the voice of the narrator. Right? So if it looks anything like this, it's the voice or thoughts of a character. If it's a square, it's the voice of the narrator. That's the easiest way to keep it in your head. All right, and in this book, you'll get two voices. You'll get the voices of characters and the voice of the narrator, and they're sort of separate. All right, so we have panel, frame, caption, word balloons. The fifth thing, the next thing is the gutter. All right, the gutter of a comic is the space in between the panels. All right, this white space, this negative space, that is the gutter. All right, so if we look at the last page layout here, in between these four panels that are going down, all right, those are all the gutters. They're the spaces. Whenever we say a gutter, we're saying it's the space in between a panel. And the space in between the panel is what makes a graphic story work as a graphic story. Putting those spaces in between pictures and words, squares with pictures and words, that's where quote unquote the magic happens. Because our brain as people is hardwired to look for patterns. We love as just humans looking for patterns. So when you see a bunch of pictures with that space in between, your mind will fill in the gaps of what is happening. Your mind will kind of give the action of the story. Right? So if we put it all together, right, this page from the end of chapter 1, all right, we see everything sort of working together in a comic. And it might be hard for you to see on your screen right now, but if you open up the PowerPoint in the week 14 folder, or if you have the book and look at the last couple of pages of chapter 1, if you return back to this, just remember that this is a good example of how everything goes together. All right, if you read this page, all right, you will get a sense of the action. You'll get a sense of the story being told. The emotions of the robber, the fear of the bartender and our main character Braz. This space here, this big white gutter right underneath it, and then just the single panel of bang with the implied blood splatter lets you know, this page lets you know what happens. You haven't read it, and you may not even be able to see the words because on your screen as you're watching this, it's too small. But just by looking at the general picture, you can kind of see, okay, this person robbed it. They tried to get told to calm down. They didn't calm down, and they shot somebody. All right, the story there is outlined for you, all with the visual language of panel, frame, speech, word balloons, and gutter. Sets the whole thing up, and in your head, you've put together the story. Okay, and so that's sort of the magic and what makes reading a graphic novel different from reading a standard book or reading poetry or just looking at a painting. It's the combination of all of these things together tells the story. The words and the art put in an order, put in a sequence, tells the story that you're then able to interpret. Last bit of suggestion is you will see things in the book that are called splash pages. Splash pages are when the entire image, one image, takes up the entire page. All right? So a splash page is when one image from the book takes up an entire page. No captions, no speech bubbles, just one big picture over the entire page. It's important to remember, when you see a splash page, when you see one big picture that takes up the entire page, you have reached the end of a chapter. All right, so that's another way that you can understand when you've reached the chapters, is because you will always get a big splash page. Just one, the whole page will be one picture. There'll be no separate panels. There'll be no captions. There'll be no speech balloons. It will just be one picture. When you hit one that's just one picture without any of the other elements, panels, gutters, frames, that means you've reached the end of a chapter. So, as we move on, here is the question that a lot of students always have. What do you read first? Go ahead and give it an answer. All right. So, basically, either tactic is effective. All right. Whichever one you chose, if you look at the pictures first or read the words first, either one of those work. The thing that you have to remember, however, is you must make sure that you're looking at both, that you're both reading the words and looking at the art together. Whichever one you do first doesn't really matter. Right? If we go back to the example we looked at, we go back to this panel. All right. However, you were going to approach this panel when you read it this week is fine. If you want to go and look at what the characters are saying to each other during the robbery first, that's perfectly fine. If you want to just take a look at the art first, then read it, that's fine as well. Now, the traditional way that you read American comics, Western comics, is as you read it, just make sure that things generally go left to right. They don't go up and down. So in the first page, this will be the first page of the book when you start reading it right here. So from here, you go, so if this is the page, you go like this. All right, you go horizontal as you read. Okay, and just make sure you're looking at both the art and the drawings. All right, because within those things, that's what makes the real element of the art important. It's what makes comics work as we put stuff together. Right. So I'm going to move on from this PowerPoint and we're going to introduce the book so I can prepare you to read the book. This is in the video attached in the week 14 folder. This is just examples from the book Making Comics by Scott McCloud. If you have a loved one who loves to draw, I highly suggest getting this for them as a birthday gift or, just something or another. They will really enjoy it. It talks a lot about comic theory and it talks about how essentially the way the authors tell the story is really important and kind of adds to our 5 key techniques. Right. But I want to make sure we have time to talk about the actual, introduce the actual book first to kind of let you get into that. Now what I want to do is introduce the the comic to you, the book that we're going to read. We've talked a little bit about how comics are made. Now let's talk about the actual book that we're going to read for this unit. So let's take a look. Here are our authors and artists. They're a pair of brothers, twins. All right. There's the real picture of them, and then here's their little drawing that they did of themselves as their own uh, images. All right. Fabio Moon and Gabriel Ba. Those are pen names. You know, their names, like most South Americans and most people in sort of the broader, you know, Latin world, you know, have much longer names. These are their pen names. They're twins. They are Brazilian, and they were born in Brazil. So they don't just have Brazilian ancestry and were born here or in New York or somewhere. They were born in Brazil. The book that you're going to read takes place in Brazil. It's really they draw a lot on their culture and their attitudes of people who are Brazil and living up and growing up in Brazil to really influence the book that you're going to read, especially a strong respect and love for the environment and natural wonders of Brazil as a country. You know, they really love and have a loving admiration for sort of the impact that nature has on Brazilian culture and way Brazilians interpret the world. You know, from beaches to deserts to jungles and sort of to farmland. They sometimes write together and create their own books together, like the one we're going to read. And they've also done stuff independently on their own for different companies and different people. The most famous book that Gabriel Ba helped draw was The Umbrella Academy. It became a TV show on Netflix for a little bit. Some of the common themes that you will see in their books, and especially in this book, are notions of family, the importance of family, what does it mean to have a family, especially as male authors and male authors in a culture like Brazil. The relationship of fathers and sons is a key theme that you will see show up repeatedly in the book. They will have themes of isolation, themes of battling depression, and themes of, what does life mean in relationship, a kind of general, how do we have a good life, and ideas of destiny, how we go about our lives, how we make sense of the random chaos of the world. And so the book that we're reading from them is Daytripper. So this book, you're going to read the collected version. This book originally did come out as 10 individual comics, single comics, in 2010. It's super popular. It's super well known. It won all of the major awards, kind of what you would think of the Oscars of, graphic novels. So we're going to approach it as having a single book with 10 chapters. So if you have bought the book already, or it's coming today or tomorrow, or if you buy the digital version, links in Blackboard, by the way, remember, it will basically read like 10 separate chapters. But it might be helpful to remember that if we were reading this in 2010, we would be waiting a month for each book to come out. It came out one book a month for 10 months. So, who is the book about? The book is about this man right here, Brás de Oliva Domingos. One of the things that you will see, the whole book basically follows him as a central character. All right, so the book really focuses in on his journeys as a way to discuss the themes the authors want to discuss. He is our sort of vehicle through the story. Right? Some things to know about Brás. He has aspirations to be a writer. like a novelist or a very famous writer. He himself is the son of a famous novelist. So already you're starting to see this idea and this relationship of fathers and sons come into play. His dad is a writer, and Bros himself wants to be a writer. You will see Bros in almost every major stage of his life. You will see him as a child. You will see him as an old man. You'll see him as a young man. You'll see him on the day he becomes a parent. You will go through the entire journey, the entire arc of his various lives, seeing each sort of snapshot moment in each individual chapters. So Bros becomes the vehicle to see how these themes of life, love, death, and family all change as we age, change with different circumstances. It allows the authors to come back and circle around onto a given theme. So especially in the first few chapters, like the chapters that you're reading for this week, all right, a lot of the themes that you're going to read and encounter in these first 4 chapters are the setup that will be paid off in chapters 7, 8, 9, and 10. So as you kind of watch the videos and I talk about here's how this theme is working in the book, here are some examples where you can see it, just note that that theme will then be paid off later on in the book. So we're going to be reading a lot of setup here that will then be paid off by Moon and Ba as authors later on in the book. So now we get to the real tricky part. So what this book does, this book has a very unusual structure. And it's a structure that some students can find confusing and frustrating at first. Okay. This book is not told in a linear order, as in we don't start with Bros as a young boy and follow him as he grows up and grows old. We don't go from point A to point B. In fact, we don't even have a life in order that's just mixed up. Right? Instead, in each chapter of the book, every single book, 1 through 10, each chapters, you will have a version of Bros that dies. Like he will literally die in each chapter. And so the best way to think of this is that you are like an omniscient being that is looking at this man's life from different, like in all of his possible lives. It's sort of, if you want to get kind of metaphysical with it, it's sort of like the idea that, uh, of parallel lives, like, parallel universes. So like, if you think of all of the major decisions you've had to do in your life, whether you had the courage to talk to somebody you liked or you didn't, or you went out on a successful date or didn't, or you took this job but not this job, or you made this decision but not that decision, right? And it would be like you'd split off, and if you had made one decision, your life would go this way. If you made the other decision, your life would go that way. That's essentially what we see with Bros. So each time he dies, think of it like you're now viewing a parallel relationship where you have a different version of him, a different version of Bros. Right? Hence why the book is called Daytripper. Each chapter is like, a day trip into somebody's life. You see how it works out, and then it ends. This will be very confusing, especially in the first 3 chapters that you read. You're going to be like, what's going on? Why are we back here? I thought he died. Did he die? The answer is yes, he did die. All right? And you're like seeing the parallel lives of him. So just note, as you read these first couple of chapters, it could be a little confusing and disorientating, but just remember what I said. Keep in mind that you are now seeing, like, not just Brass's life, you're seeing various snippets of all the parallel lives he could have had, some good, some bad, depending on choices he had made. And that's supposed to allow you as a reader to kind of think about your own life the same way. All right, what are we as people except not the collection of choices we made and choices we didn't make? Think of all of the ways, look back at your life and think of all of the times where you made a choice. And if you had made the other choice, how different your life would be. Right? And so that's kind of the world that we as readers enter into when we come into this book. We see Brass's life through all the changes that he makes and he doesn't make. Right? But just note that every chapter you get, you're going to get a death. Like that's going to be one alternate reality of Brass that you will see end. And then you'll see another one. And then you'll see another one and another one. And once you get around chapters 5 and 6, you will understand the way that the story is being told, and you'll be able to see how by doing this, it allows the authors to come back to those common themes. Brass's relationship with his father and his relationship to fatherhood kicks off the book. It's one of the most important themes in the book. It starts up in that first chapter, and the first chapter's comments on fatherhood are very incomplete because that life is over, and then we'll have another life of Brass where he can kind of learns a little bit more about his father. So the structure will be confusing at first, right? But just note, in every chapter, Brass is going to die, and you are essentially seeing, the parallel universes, the parallel lives of our main character. It's all the same main character. It's just different alternate versions of him. Moments when he zigged when he should have zagged, and usually these moments always lead to his death. All right, so just kind of, bear with the book and just keep in mind, all right, these are alternate realities. So the Brass that you see in chapter 1 is the same person that you see in chapter 2, but it's a parallel version of his life. And this whole structure was heavily influenced by this quite famous book, Brazilian book, The Posthumous Memoirs of Brás Cubas, in which the main character tells his life story from the coffin. Like the main character is already dead, and he's reflecting back on his life. So that's one of the reasons why Brass, and you see these parallel versions of Brass throughout the book. All right, so just let me stress that one more time. It might be a little confusing. Bear with it. The book teaches you how to read it as you go. Just note that it's the same character, but like parallel versions of himself. One thing that I strongly suggest you do before kicking off and reading the book proper is you have this foreword from another comic book author, Craig Thompson, the author of Blankets. It kind of outlines a lot of what the book is doing. It outlines a lot of sort of the themes to look at. And so I would read this page first, as it might be a helpful way to kind of prep you to read the book. All right. So the next part of this PowerPoint, I'm going to leave and wait for you to read chapter 1, where this breaks down all of the themes to look for. We're definitely going to talk about the themes next week. Right? It's always kind of a bit to throw at everybody when we start a new unit. But okay, so just to conclude, when you look at week 14, All right. If you've not purchased the book, here are 2 links to purchase it via Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Don't forget that if you haven't purchased the book today, if you have the capability to, I strongly suggest you purchase the digital copy. You'll get it immediately. It's the exact same book. It's the exact same thing. And you'll be able to read it right away. This is the PowerPoint that we talked about here, the discussion of how to read comics, right? And then for this week, you have to read chapters 1 through 4 of the book. And here are videos going through each one of those chapters, chapters 1 and 2, chapter 3, and chapter 4. So how you want to use these videos and PowerPoints is up to you. If you want to watch them before you read the chapter, that's totally fine. If you want to do it after, that's totally fine. But I would, however you want to do it, after you read each chapter of the book, remember that there's a video in PowerPoint that talks about the themes and kind of walks you through some of the key parts of each chapter. All right, and you'll always have a video for every single chapter of the book. All right, once you're done with chapters 1 and 2, you'll be able to do writing quizzes 7 and 8. Right. Once you're done with chapters 1 through 4, you'll be able to do discussion board number 8. Don't forget when you do your discussion boards to respond to the post of a classmate. That is the only way that you can complete them.